Right now, you remember when Christ is out in the desert and tempted by Satan after the 40 days of isolation after the baptism, that the third temptation of Satan, which is, I would say, the ultimate temptation, is one of power. Right now, it's very interesting.
You can have all of this.
Right. It's straightforward power. And that's the temptation that Moses falls prey to continually in his work as the Exodus leader as well. It's why he doesn't get into the promised land. Like, there's a very strict, and it's something that Christ himself forswears utterly. No force,
right,
regardless of the provocation.
Yeah.
Now, what you have here in this doctrine that you just described is not only the desire for universal destruction, which, as you pointed out, is part and parcel of Marx's celebration of Goethe's Mephistophelian doctrine, but also allied with worship of power itself.
Right.
Because otherwise, why the forcible?
Right.
Because he could have written the overthrow of everything.
That's right.
And that could happen at the level of idea.
Yeah.
And of course...
Or even the phrase, the end, right? It can only be attained with the end of all.
Right.
But no, they want the forcible overthrow.
Right, which begs the question. Okay, so what is it that you want? Do you want the end state where everything's raised to the ground so that you have a new beginning? Or do you want all the absolutely satanic pleasure of the act of forcible destruction?
Right.
And I would say, if you spend any time at all analyzing the history of Stalinist Soviet Union, including the Leninist period, for that matter, what you see fundamentally is a celebration of sadistic devastation, right? That's the fundamental ethos. That's the fundamental goal. Now, the flag waving about the new utopia that's going to be created in the future, that's all cover story. That's all camouflage.
Sure.
The actual worship is, because the things that happened in those communist countries are so appalling that,
it's unbelievable.
Well, that people won't pay any attention to them because they're too much to even contemplate.
Right.
And so no one wants to know anything about them. But it seems to me that the point of dancing naked and triumphantly in the smoking ruins, that's fundamentally the point. And if you happen to be jumping up and down on the bodies of your enemies and the toppled statues of your culture, so much the better.
And wondering how it goes, how the personal matters with like the public, right? Okay, the end of his manifesto calls for the forcible overthrow of everything that exists. So that's an actual policy prescription at the end, right? We're going to forcibly overthrow everything that exists. And as we saw in the private, that's what he believes in his life, in the poetry. So you see it in the poetry. So you see one directly leads to the other. His hatred of religion, right? Communism begins where atheism begins. The famous line, the opiate of the masses, right? That full quote, a lot of people, I've heard people say from time to time, well, I kind of see what he's getting at there. I mean, religion can be like a sort of drug for people, right? Maybe like a placebo, maybe like a crutch. But if you read that whole line, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature. It is the heart of a heartless world. It is the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. And then Lenin picked that up and said, like Marx said, religion is the opium of the masses. It is a kind of spiritual booze. It is medieval mildew. There is nothing more abominable than religion. And so what does that mean? Damn it, that means we're going to shut down the churches, right? And we're going to put them in jail, and we're going to be an officially atheistic country. We're going to create a league of the militant godless. You're not going to be allowed to be a religious person. So the private thoughts are actually being implemented and acted out.
Well, the other thing too about that phrase is it's actually a lie. And it's a lie in two ways. So there's a Canadian philosopher, Taylor, who wrote about this in a book he wrote on identity. And he pointed out that the medieval fear of hell was at least the equal of the medieval fear of death. Okay, so that begs a question. It's like, if your religion is an opium, then why isn't it just all smiley faces and fun? Right? Why? Well, hell is a really good start. It's like, and the cynics might say, well, hell is a convenient place to put those you hate. But you have to be cynical and naive and stupid to come up with that theory, because you're a fool if you think that the fear of hell was anything but real among the believers in those periods of time where the reality of hell was amplified. They were terrified of that.
Yeah.
Right. And so what are you going to do? You're going to do something convoluted like, well, you have to leaven the opium with a bit of terror so that it becomes believable enough to be a soporific. It's like, hey, man, your theory's getting a little convoluted at that point. It's like, why bother with hell? And so that, to me, and it's the same with the Freudian critique, you know, that it's a form of immaturity and over-reliance on a benevolent father. It's like, well, the father isn't all benevolent. There's hell.
Right.
And so you better watch your step.
Yeah.
And part of that is implemented by terror. And then, but there's more to it than
And
that,
Jesus
too.
said, you want to follow me? Pick up your cross.
Well, that's the next thing.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so we have Christ, the happy-faced God, who asks people only to believe that everything is good and there's no price to be paid for that. No, that's not. That's exactly that couldn't be a bigger lie, because there isn't a larger sacrifice that is possible than the one that the founder of Christianity required of himself and his followers. There's nothing in that in the least that's opiate. Now you might say, well, the happy thought that you go to heaven when you die is the opiate. It's like, well, wait a second. First of all, that only happens if you've actually lived a good life. And the cost of not doing that is, well, now we're back to the hell problem. So I don't buy the Freudian interpretation that it's all, you know, immature dependence on the Heavenly Father, so to speak. And I certainly don't buy the Marxist doctrine that there's anything about it that's opiate. Now, you could say any naive person and any person looking for unearned security could take any doctrine and use it as a security blanket. And I think there's some truth in that. But boy, if you don't think that applies to radical leftism as much as it applies to Christianity, far more than it applies to Christianity, you're not thinking in the least. I mean, what you see with the radical leftists on campus now is that they make the presumption that all the leftist theorizing is predicated on an admirable compassion. It's like, well, if you want an opiate, there's one.
Right. That's
hypersimplification, pathological hypersimplification that's morally self-serving and dangerous beyond belief.
Right.
So,
and Marx said, I was just looking for the quote right now and I couldn't find it, but one of his criticisms of Christianity later was he said it preaches cowardice, self-contempt, self-abasement, self-sacrifice. It's like, well, I don't know if it preaches cowardice, but it preaches self-sacrifice.
Those things don't go in the same category.
Right, exactly.
No, they certainly don't.
I know, what Christ didn't lack courage.
Right.
Right? But for Mark, it was about the selfishness. And in fact, that moment where the devil is tempting Christ, right? And Christ says to him, man does not live on bread alone.
Yes.
The Marxist actually acts as if man does live on bread alone.
Precisely.
And they believe that if you solve the economic problem, if you solve the class problem, I mean, that's the key to your utopia right there.